So, on the meantime, I would like to tell you that in this week we'll share about different topics with the members of this conference. We'll talk about different topics across panels. We'll talk about aging, trends, and challenges. We'll also talk about topics of interest regarding retirement funds, which is a topic that we'll have in brief. So, for the organization, it has been relevant the participation of the subregions and the Social Security Commissions, which are two organizations that are part of our conference. We also have several ally organizations and experts on Social Security for the region that joined the celebration of this Social Security Week 2024. We talk with teams that this could be named the month of the Social Security because we have had several activities that are scheduled during this month. In Zoom, we have our Secretary General, Alvaro Villar Hernandez, who will address us for the inauguration of this panel. Thank you very much, Luz. Good evening, everyone who are on the headquarters of the CISS and virtually. Also, those who will be part of the following activity that is in charge of the American Association of Actuary and Investment. We will talk about retirement fund investment. We will have Luis Martinez from the Panama Social Security Bank, and we'll have also the representation from Social Security from the International Social Security Organization. It is a pleasure for us to have you. We have Mr. Osio, who is part of the Mexican Investment Retirement Fund. We also have the Latin American AON representation in Mexico and Jorge Melendez from Afore 21, which is a retirement fund for Mexico. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to participate in this panel. We'll also have Pedro Alcántara Polanco, who is the president of the Organization for Actuary, and he's part of the Dominican Republic government, who is in charge of going with us and exploring his experience from their perspective. Now, they'll talk about the consideration that we need to take into account for the investment in retirement funds, how sustainable it is, education and improvement on the workers' well-being, and the contributions in retirement funds on the long run. It is relevant that we are talking constantly about this topic, and we have different scenarios in the topic of savings, sustainability, and financing from the experts who are with us. So, with no further ado, we will have Luis Martinez, who will be the moderator of this panel, along with Pedro Alcántara. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone who is joining this panel, Retirement Fund Investment. We will introduce our moderators, along with Mr. Pedro Alcántara Polanco, who is a lawyer who is specialized in finance. He has studied investment law, social security, and social investment. He is in charge of the Institute of the Elderly of the Social Security Organization for the Dominican Republic, and he is part of the CISS for the period 2025. He works as vice president of the Inter-American Actuary Organization and is part of the direction of the Elderly Insurance, Disability, and Survival of the CISS. Now, before I give the floor to Pedro, I would like to address you from my organization. Thank you, Mr. Alvaro Velarca, for organizing the different subregions and this Social Security Week. Now, I would like to greet everyone, and I especially say big hello to the Vice President of the Actuary and Financing organization. Now we'll have the first panel member. Now we'll have a first presentation. As you mentioned previously, Paul Mondova, who's a specialist technician from the CISS as of July 2016. He's a coordinator of the technical coordination of this organization on family benefits, and he's also part of the group regarding Social Security. He's part of the group that oversees social retirement, and he is focused also in Social Security coverage, their answers to the COVID-19 pandemic, their resilience and sustainability, as well as the focus in social protection across the lifespan. Thank you very much, Master Mundo. Welcome to this panel.
Can I please gain access to open my video, please? I don't know if my presentation is on the right side, please. Oh, okay, it's good now. Thanks. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity given for me to do this presentation on behalf of the International Social Security Association. I am Paul Mundo Angomba. I am a technical specialist, as it was presented a while ago, with the International Social Security Association. I coordinate the ESA Technical Commission on Family Benefits and that on investment of Social Security funds. I would have to give a brief presentation on pension investment considerations. And for today's event, the outline of my presentation would focus on the following points. The first is I would give a quick presentation of ESA as an institution. Then we look at the right to Social Security and the design of pension systems. We look at pension financing and pension funds. We look at the mandate and design of pension schemes. And we look at investing pension funds, the rationale and the principles. Then we look at pension funds and the investment environment, the investment vision and investment decisions, investment principles and strategy. And we conclude with some questions on what investment strategies in a changing world. So to begin, I would quickly give a brief on what ESA, the International Social Security Association, is. So it's the leading global institution for Social Security administrations, founded in 1927 under the auspices of the International Labour Organization. As at date, it counts a total of 323 member institutions from the 4 regions, that is the Americas, Africa, Asia, Pacific, and Europe, We have representation in 163 countries out of the 193 that counts the UN system. We have 19 liaison offices and focal points. We have 13 technical commissions and working groups. Like I said a while ago, one of the technical commissions is that on investment of social security funds. That is the issue, the point of discussion for today's session. We have 13 sets of guidelines on different issues on social security administration, ranging from governance, actuarial work, investment of social security funds, service quality, ICT, and a host of others. These guidelines can be accessed directly on the ISA website. We have a total of 67 staff in Geneva. We have over 8,700 registrations in ISA events. So basically, that is ISA as an institution, and I'll quickly switch to our discussion for the day. That is the focus on the considerations for pension fund investments. But before we get into the core of the financing mechanism and the investment, I want us to look quickly at the right to social security and the design of pension systems. We'll realize that from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, social security is a fundamental human right contained in Article 22 and detailed in Article 25 of that instrument, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was subsequently transposed into the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights on the one hand, and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So specifically, the right to social security was transposed into the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of 1966. Before the 1966 Covenant, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, had adopted the Minimum Standards Convention, referred to the ILO Social Security Minimum Standards Convention of 1952. That spells out 9 branches of social security. This includes from pensions, work injury benefits, maternity benefits, unemployment benefits, old age, and so on. And we realize that pensions are the most common form of social protection across the different regions of the world. This can be affirmed by the ILO 2021 report. And we realize that national pension systems generally cover 3 of the 9 branches of social security. And of these 9 branches, you have old age, invalidity, and survivors. Those are generally covered by pension systems. Then we realize that national pension programs are both contributory and non-contributory. So if you look at it from a policy level, you have pensions as a policy instrument, and then the financing mechanisms, you have the contributory and the non-contributory schemes. And for the contributory schemes, which will be more of the focus in this presentation, we have the defined benefit schemes and the defined contribution schemes. Quickly, let's look at pension financing and pension funds. Like I said, on the financing, I will focus on the contributory pensions, and then the programs that go with contributory pensions, we have defined benefits programs or schemes and defined contribution schemes. So we realize that in the recent past, both DCs and DBs are increasing their funding levels, resulting to the accumulation of social security reserves. Hence, investing social security funds has become a core activity in governance and administration of pension schemes. Basically, social security contributions are deferred earnings for future consumptions. When deferred, earnings are then retained by employers and transferred to pension schemes as social security contributions. Under the arrangements, there could be defined benefits, there could be defined contributions, it could be gap, scale premium, or pay-as-you-go systems. Contributions would accumulate to constitute reserves. So when you have deferred earnings that are to be used in future, pension schemes then find themselves with a duty to protect accumulated reserves in form and substance. Now, talking about the form, that is the safekeeping of financial assets. You have let's say a $10,000 accumulated in the pension fund. It has to be kept physically somewhere. And then in substance, we talk in terms of ensuring that the value of the assets does not depreciate over time. And one key consideration here is inflation. So the minimum that one would expect is that pension funds should be invested to ensure at least that there are returns that will write off inflation. And then other variables such as currency fluctuations may impact negatively on the value of assets. Hence, Social Security reserves or pension reserves are invested for at least three principal reasons. The first is safekeeping, the second is the safeguard against erosion, and the third is that of revenue generation. Good. So now, what is the mandates and the design of pension schemes? The mandates and design of pension schemes are framed on the government's duty to ensure the realization of the right to Social Security for all. And what's the mandate? Administer national pension programs and ensure effective access to adequate pension benefits and when contingencies fall due. So this, we can see it in terms of the operational governance dimension of pension schemes. Now, the vision is to ensure the financial viability and enhance the long-term financial sustainability of pension schemes. This now brings us to the aspect of financial governance. And on financial governance, on the financial governance dimensions, we realize that pension schemes are confronted with a perennial challenge of improving the adequacy of benefits and enhancing the long-term sustainability of systems. Now, if we want to look at the question on the sustainability of pension systems, there are three key dimensions that come to play. The first is that of access, who is having access to pension benefits, affordability, who can afford for pension benefits in terms of insured earnings and contributions, and then the adequacy on benefit in terms of what benefits are actually paid, what's the benefit amount, what's the replacement rate of the pension system. Going forward, we'll try to look at the investing of pension funds, the rationale and principles. Basically, we would see from the line indicated pay as you go, which shows the typical evolution of the expenditure of a pension system. And it is established that a pension system matures on average over a period of 60 years, 60 to 70 years, where it gets to a point where it's more or less curves out. And the contribution rates are generally the gap, which we all know, which is a fixed rate placed over a period of time. And when the contributions are above the expenditure, we accumulate reserves. And when contributions go below expenditure, then we use reserves to pay off benefits. So as stated before, Social Security reserves are invested for at least three principal reasons. One, safekeeping of assets; two, safeguard against erosion; and then that of revenue generation. And generally, reserved funds are invested with the justified expectation of positive reserves in accordance with best knowledge. That is the prudent person principle. That is greatly developed in the ISA guidelines on investment of Social Security funds. That is basically looking at the decision a rational person would make in the face of information available. And the core investment principle that are prescribed, are that of safety, that is ensure the safety of the assets; liquidity, ensure that you have sufficient liquid assets to offset benefits when they fall due, because Social Security benefits most often are cash-based benefits. And then yields, now in terms of returns, what are the returns on the invested funds? And when these conditions are satisfied, there is a consideration for socioeconomic utility of pension funds. Now we are looking at economic, social, and governance considerations in the investment of Social Security funds. Now, what is the criteria for asset management and what are the challenges? Generally, the approach to investing funds, not just Social Security funds, will be looking at that of maximizing returns. But the question that one will ask when it comes to pension funds, like we said, safety is a fundamental principle. And now, in trying to maximize returns, are you taking risk beyond the risk appetite of the institution? And now you have to look at the safety consideration. So while trying to maximize returns, there are constraints that are imposed by the safety requirements. And there is increased higher levels of regulation of pension funds as opposed to other classical investors. Then we have the notion of minimizing risk. But when you try to minimize risk, then you might end up constructing a portfolio which will have lower returns. So you have a consideration on the yields. What are the yields considerations? Then the other one is that of optimizing time horizons. You want to invest for as long as possible to ensure that you level off the fluctuations in risk, you level off fluctuations in financial markets and the volatility. But the question is, what are the liquidity considerations? You need the liquid resources today to pay off benefits. So you realize that you have to bring in the whole concept of liquidity management in the investment management procedure of social security schemes. Then you have benchmarking, where you establish a criteria, what you want to achieve. But the question is, would it respond to the economic, social, and governance considerations that we expect to gain from social security funds? Now, what happens? What's the pension environment, the investment environment? I want us to look at pension funds and the investment environment. The first is that we look at the financial markets. In most countries, you have underdeveloped, ill-equipped, or saturated financial markets. So this is a major challenge that pension funds are facing, in the sense that they either operate in countries where financial markets are underdeveloped, they are ill-equipped, or they are saturated. So what are the options? What are the alternatives? What are the strategies that are put in place in this environment in which we find ourselves? This is an issue that should be looked at. Now you have the investment strategy. Generally, we look at minimizing minimizing risk and maximizing returns. And there is a presumption that there is a correlation between risk and returns. The higher the risk, the higher the returns. The lower the risk, the lower the returns. So you realize that when you have two apparently conflicting objectives, that of minimizing risk, which obviously would correlate with lower returns, and that of maximizing returns, which correlate with higher risk. So how do you balance off these considerations? Then we equally have emerging challenges. You know, we are in an environment that is in constant evolution, that is in constant change. And what are some of these emerging challenges that are confronting pension schemes? That the first is that of the demographic transition and aging populations. At the introduction, the moderator said there is a session on aging. You know, this is the core debate on pensions. It has triggered the whole debate on pension reforms, and we have seen in countries like Chile, where the pension benefits systems was reviewed and then reversed subsequently. We have political transitions and socioeconomic policy changes. When politics change, the strategy to invest may change. They may change the social security legislation, which will have impacts on how to invest social security funds. We have technological transitions and economic transformations. Today we talk about the digital economy that is bringing us back to the old tradition of informality, people that are not covered by existing social security legislation. How do we address this? And then we have climate change and new risk, then shocks and extreme events. All countries saw what happened recently with the COVID-19 pandemic. So when addressing the question of sustainability within the context of access, affordability, and adequacy, how does it play? Countries, governments who generally want to keep the contribution rates low, ensure that some countries are putting contribution ceilings. We have issues with covered population, like new forms of work which are not covered, the benefit formula and duration of benefits. So the longer people live, the more they have benefits paid over a longer period of time, and the impacts on adequacy of benefits. So to show the investment vision and investment decisions, I want us to take a hypothetical situation wherein we try to build a case and see how the investment principles would play over the long run. So basically, we know investment would begin from asset liability modeling. That is what would inform the strategic asset allocation. Like which asset should you have at what time and in what form? So I take a basic case of a country that is in a base year with contributions of 150,000 US dollars. The benefit expenditure for the current year is 100,000 US dollars. We can put the figures in millions, so it gives us the macro picture. And that GDP growth is estimated at 4% and then constant for the next 30 years. And then the benefit expenditure growth rate is about 7.4%. So the question is, what investment strategy? So putting these figures into a basic Excel model gives us more or less the output we see on the left. Sorry, on the right. So we realized that the benefit expenditure grows exponentially over that period. Contribution income would grow, but not at the same rate with the benefit expenditure, the benefit expenditure, which means that our reserves, that is our surplus contributions, would decline over time. That is contributions minus expenditure would decline over time. And we accumulate reserves, but what happens? Let me move to the next slide and see what really happens. So we realize that during the first decade, that is the first 10 years, there is an increase in reserves. And during this period where we accumulate reserves, contributions are higher than expenditure. So we have a possibility to build reserves. When we get to the second decade, that is from around the 12th year onward, based on the assumptions that we made in our scenario case, we realize that the expenditure exceeds contributions. As such, we can no longer accumulate reserves, but we have to draw from reserves to finance benefits. And from the 20th year, our reserves go negative. And the question that we ask is, if you have this reality based on your asset liability modeling, how do you design your investment strategy? What strategy, what should be your investment objectives? So looking at the three core principles of safety, liquidity, and yields, during the first year, we realized that we don't have a liquidity, the first decade, sorry, we realized that we don't have an issue with liquidity because our contributions are above our expenditure. So we can just work on two considerations, that of safety and yields. So we can maximize our returns because we know we don't have constraints on liquidity. During the second decade, where our contributions are lower than our expenditure, we need to ensure that our investments are safe and they are sufficiently liquid such that they can be materialized for the payment of benefits. So in this particular, the second decade, there is an increased consideration on liquidity over yields because you might invest in a profitable venture which is not liquid. That would result to a breach in the fundamental mandate of paying benefits when contingencies fall due. And in the last decade, we virtually have no reserves because we go negative. And the question now becomes that of yields and liquidity. How can we stimulate the economic environment? How can we stimulate the macro environment to see that we have alternatives? For instance, improving economic growth that will bring about greater contributions, and we keep that in a liquid form that enables us to finance our benefits. Basically, this is a model that we can play around with, and then we look at the risk-return dynamics. And one thing that we need to know is that beyond the traditional...
Algo que hay que saber es que más allá
one thing that we should try and understand here
tenemos
is
que
that
entender
beyond the traditional
más allá
risk-return strategies that are used
de las
by
estrategias tradicionales que se usan por las
there
instituciones
is an
clásicas,
important
hay
dimension that
una
we need
dimensión
to
importante
bring
que
in
necesitamos
line, that is
considerar y
the-
ponerla en línea también.
look at
Es
the
decir,
risk,
hay que
we look at
considerar
the
los
returns,
riesgos, los
we look at the
retornos,
opportunities,
las
we look at the
oportunidades,
constraints,
las
not just
limitaciones.
risks and
O sea,
returns.
no nada más riesgos y retornos, sino todo en conjunto.
Now, the final slide, we look at
En esta última diapositiva
what investment
vamos a ver cuáles son
strategies
aquellas
in the changing
estrategias de
world.
inversión que están cambiando.
First, we have to look at accept the fact that we are in a changing environment. Globalization has enhanced correlation across financial markets, and financial market instruments making diversification across financial markets less attractive. So initially, we could invest in other financial markets, but with increased globalization, financial markets are increasingly correlated. So diversifying investments in terms of geographical location is not as attractive as before, because most countries, if not all countries, have seen reasonable improvements in the functioning of their financial markets, and they tend to be correlated. Then we have domestic capital requirements. We have developmental deficits, and the need for capital in developing countries prompt more strict regulations on social security funds. So countries try to restrict foreign investment, thereby keeping social security institutions at a fixed, wherein they might opt for less attractive instruments simply because they have no right to invest out of the country or certain zones. Then you have the monetary policy, the impacts of financial flows on monetary policy, interest rates, money supply, currency valuation, and all of that are issues that come to play when we want to invest pension funds. Then we have the macroeconomic environment. We realize that social security systems, which are dominantly pension systems, as I presented from the opening slides, are not, they don't work in silos. They are connected strongly with the economy, and the investment would play a lot on employment, inflation, and social security systems. So what dynamics can we put in place in such an environment? Then we have climate change and the need to improve on environmental protection. Climate change affects all facets of societal life, including the environmental determinants of health. And when you look at social security in its most simplistic way, as coined in the ILO Social Protection Recommendation of 2012, Recommendation 202, it talks about access to basic income security and essential health care. So if you live in an environment where there is climate change with impacts on climate change, then the investment of social security funds may factor in these aspects, which would then impact on asset allocation and portfolio construction. So to conclude, we would realize that we are moving from an environment of minimizing risk, which was like based on the risk return model. The vision was on minimizing risk. Now we are moving towards optimizing opportunities. Like the question is, what are the alternative opportunities for social security to invest pension funds? What openings do we have? What are the new asset classes that we can get into? And then we should shift this more or less to creating value for social security institutions, creating value for the government, creating value for the environment, and to see that in return, this then strengthens the financial viability and long-term sustainability of social security schemes with the goal of improving access to social security benefits and services. So I would take questions and answers based on the as they'll be directed by the moderator. I want to thank you very much for your kind attention, and I would give the floor back to the moderator at this stage. Thanks very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mundoa. Give me just a moment. It was a great presentation. So I would like to thank all the participants in Zoom and in all the social media for the CISS. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We are gathering all the answers in the chat of the Zoom. And if you can send us your questions through the social media of the CIS, we will ask them. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Ocio Cerón, General Director of Risk Administration of CONSAR. He has participating actively in other subject matters and in the mitigation of SARS and looking for better management of resources. So to include this within the financial strategies. He was part of the team responsible to address the themes of risk administration in the Afores and the research team for suspicious activities for preventing money laundering and terrorism revenues. He has a master's degree for the Management College in France, and he has the CESGA certification issued by the European Association and Analytics Associations. You have the floor, Mr. Ocio Cerón. You are very welcome in this conference. Thank you so much for having me here. Can you confirm to me that you can see my presentation? Yes. Thank you so much. I am going to talk about how we consider sustainability in the retirement fund in Mexico. Let me give you some context. This is the size of the retirement funds in the country. I am going to talk about how we manage them. Currently, Afores, the entities responsible to manage and administrate the retirement funds, manage more than $350 billion. And from these resources, half of them correspond to the yields that they have acquired, another to direct contributions of security holders. The yielding has been around 11.33% in the last 10 years, accounting for 19% of the GDP. And it's important to have this perspective because institutional investors are the most relevant in the country. And according to their progress and their sophistication in investment, increasingly they are more relevant for the country's economy and for the financial system. Some of the relevant changes that we have had in this system, in the retirement system, correspond to the migration of targeted funds, as they know them in English. With this scheme, we adapt better the age of the worker to the fund that he is affiliated in, and the risk profile has to decrease as the worker or the employer approaches his retirement age. This scheme was designed in 2019, and this has allowed us to improve the way we manage resources in such a way that they are targeted in the long-term investments. Another important change is a reform to the law for retirement funds. Among of these changes, they increase the contributions for retirement resources from 6.6% to up to a 15% gradually. And this is already happening. With these two facts, we modify the infrastructure of the retirement funds. So the regulator and the Afores had to restate the way they were going to manage resources. I'm going to give you some specific examples. It was necessary to make some adjustments to regulatory limits due to the growth for the assets. And it is estimated that by 2030, resources are going to double according to what we have now. Another example is that we are constantly looking for potential instruments and to recalibrate the limits in order to visualize and to protect risk in the retirement fund portfolio. And in the fourth paragraph, we have inclusion of better practices. So we are going to focus on sustainability. This is an overview of investments, sustainable investments. By the end of March of this year, Afores were more than 100 issuance that were pitch hold. And out of this issuance, a third part of the total is part of these retirement funds. So these instruments are very successful. They want to be part of the retirement funds. And if we focus only in those instruments in which not all the market is participating, it goes up to 45%. So when they participate, the idea is to have an average tenure that accounts for 3.33% of net assets. So it seems to be that it's a low amount, but vis-a-vis the size of the resources that they are managing is not a very low investment. So CONSAR is the regulating and oversight entity of retirement funds. Why do we think it's important to include ASG factors, social environmental factors? Well, we have two perspectives. First, there is a link between the ASG factors and the retirement funds investments. It's important to maximize long term yields and to manage risk, as they told you before. But we have to relay them in an efficient way, ensuring that investments are responsible and sustainable. So the well being is not going to be only economical, it's going to have other benefits for the insured people, the social and environmental benefits. In the CONSAR, we have a mission, a vision, and objectives. The main objective is to transform the saving system for retirement. The center of our decisions are the workers. We have to maximize and ensure their savings, but we would like to give them a full retirement fund that is going to fulfill their needs for their specific time. So, what have we been doing as regulators with these retirement funds? In this slide, I am presenting you the timeline of the development and the evolution of the regulation at the Commission. In 2010, in the Commission, we started to address the ASG matters. As of 2016, we have more information available. The Commission and the regulated and the financial market for environmental and financial and social matters was slow. So we were analyzing all this information in the year 2019. In one of the dispositions, we issued the first elective regulation. We request some aspects that were voluntary. So from 2018 to 2019, we realized that if we wanted these issues to be materialized efficiently in the retirement funds, it was necessary to make them mandatory. So in 2019, we updated them and they became mandatory, but it is enforced in the first working day of 2022. We gave them 2 years to recover all this knowledge and to analyze them so they could be able to apply them in their daily activities for the management of retirement funds. May 2022, we carried out a review, and in this same year, at the end of the last quarter, we updated this information. We requested to talk about certifications as well. I am not elaborating on the regulation because I'm going to address that in the next slide. This is just the timeline so you can see the evolution on how to be more specific and extending this situation because it was very relevant. Now, what are the pillars that we defined as relevant in the Commission? With the objectives and the goals that we have, we created 5 pillars fundamental to implement this knowledge. First, inside the investment processes. So retirement funds, for decision making and for managing their investment processes, they have to take into account ASG processes. The second pillar, risks, because this is a matter of risk. On one hand, environmental, social matters have shown that they can endanger portfolio. And of course, there are some opportunities for investment, but we cannot disregard risk. So for risk management of the retirement funds, we need to consider also ASG concepts. In the third pillar, the use of corporate rights. Due to the size that they have, usually they have the possibility to participate with technical entities, to be part of the boards. And this is important to be considered. And all these corporate rights have to be used so they can surveil the ASG principles. So this is according to the regulation. The fourth pillar has to do with disclosure. It's important to have clarity on the policy manuals about what they are doing. It is also important to inform all this information to the workers and to the employers. They need to know what they are doing with their retirement funds. So that's why we have this fourth pillar, disclosure. And we had two documents for public consultation that have to do with investment strategy, where they contain information about what their retirement fund is doing with ASG matters. The last pillar has to do with officer certification. During the first year where the first four pillars were designed, we realized that knowledge was very basic, or there was a lack of knowledge in their retirement funds, stakeholders, and we as regulators. So we focus on identifying certifications. So now it is mandatory that at least one officer from the risk area and from the financial area needed to have one of the three international certifications that are considered the most important ones globally. So we believe that together these five pillars address all the issues that we would like to address in regards to ASG. In the last update, February 16, we wanted to elaborate a little bit more on the framework for disclosing information. There are some that have to do with financial matters. So we need to learn about best practices in retirement funds. We ask the retirement funds to start using their disclosure strategies using all these schemes. And there is a lot of information regarding bonuses, specialized funds, PSG or Parry-Haldane. Well, we have been out of scope. So now we have this type of investments with these assets. So within the regulation, we have to ask for ASG policies for those managers of alternative investments so they can identify what are the equivalences between what they are looking for as retirement fund administrators or the ASG criteria that the alternative investments manager is using. And lastly, there are these classification documents to know if a project or an investment is green or not. Mexico has a sustainable taxonomy as of March of last year. And we are just starting to ask for investment portfolio for retirement funds to be in alignment with this taxonomy. So the whole structure of the retirement funds have to be in compliance with the social and environmental principles that Mexico has as a goal. It is important to mention that this strategy that has been developed by the CONSAR was not done only by us. We are part of the Sustainable Finance Committee, that is a large working group where we are including all the financial institutions of Mexico, the regulators, the central bank, among others. And so every entity has different activities in this community, and we have different work groups in order to develop in a better way a financial system that is supporting sustainability. So not only retirement funds, but issuers, the bank, insurance companies, and all this financial system have to do that. And lastly, I would like to share with you what are the goals and what we did we do in order to design the short, medium, and long-term principles. If you see a check mark, is that they have been addressed and they are according with the regulation and in agreement with different entities. However, this matrix has to be evolving. I am going to focus on those items that have not been checked long term. Some of them have to do with risk and biodiversity issues, among others. Regarding risk, we have tried to convey to the administrators that everything that is related with sustainability are opportunity and risk. In the event that we don't identify these non-financial variables that traditionally were not considered, they we could lose good opportunities of investment. So we need to identify entities that should grow more efficiently. But maybe we can disregard some risks that if they occur, they generate catastrophic losses for their investments. So double materiality has to do with the value of retirement funds that affect the environment, but also what the environment can generate to the ecosystem according to their decisions that could affect the investments in retirement funds. So this double materiality should be measured and should be monitored in in order to identify where there are additional risks that have not been identified traditionally. Stress scenarios. Basically, central bank has developed very complex models that are looking to identify, depending on the decisions that Mexico or other countries make regarding the reduction of global temperature, how some risk could be materialized in economical, industrial, and sectorial terms. How the energy sector could be affected, the manufacturing sector, etc., depending on the decisions and the scenarios. With these scenarios, we could visualize long-term objectives for the retirement funds card, card portfolio, rate of interest that could generate better evaluations for their assets. And biodiversity matters. In the last years, we have heard a lot about biodiversity. So the issues that have to do with ecosystems and biodiversity are more complicated and affect deeply to the financial system and others. So if they are not considered, then they can generate very catastrophic risk for us. Therefore, they are considered for the long term, but because it's difficult to measure them, however, they are considered as a risk for us. So this is the end of my presentation, and I am going to be waiting for your questions. Thank you so much. The next speaker, Mr. Moisés Pérez Peñalosa, with more than 35 years of experience as asset manager in different institutions of the insurance and bank segment. And he has been a partner of one of the most important consulting companies in Mexico. He has been consultant for AOM in Latin America. He has an MBA in management of corporations. He has a PhD degree by the IPADE. He has been as advisor in finances for the IPADE as well, and from the Mexican Association of Human Resources Management. And he is the official speaker for matters that have to do with retirement funds. And he has a disruptive approach, and he is focusing on the main concerns for financial health of retirement funds. Mr. Peñalosa, You have the floor, so you can share with us your great experience. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me okay? I will share my screen. Thank you for inviting me to this event that is so relevant personally and professionally. Now, I will share with you a couple of ideas that are somewhat different to the conventional wisdom regarding investment. We'll see the education and the improvement of the workers' financial well-being. If we see the flyer and the central topic of this topic, investment on pension funds, to see the best practices in the management and administration of pension funds, we'll see two core issues. First of all, they are highly professionalized institutions. We see that the professionals handle millions of pensions accounts, and then we have good yields. We have improved the well-being of individuals. And thirdly, the processes are highly questioned in the region. They are strongly regulated, so it allows for a better ease of mind to see the future resources that they can have so that they can improve the situation in the region. When we talk about this invitation, I'd like to talk about a topic that's often unrelated to this. So, the recent crises have indicated that we have several conditions in the region. First of all, the population lacks information and knowledge on the basics on economics and finance. If you ask a person about investment, about finance, the answer is that they don't know or they feel like they lack knowledge. One is a limitant for the other. There's a limited capacity for decision making by the population. They cannot foresee, they cannot anticipate what they need to do. However, if we associate ignorance limits the ability to make better decisions. This is something that has been done across the region. Third, given this lack of knowledge and lack of decision-making ability, there's a bad financial health that's generalized across the population. What we see is a great product on the management. We need to start working more punctually on improving the financial health related to the actives that people have across the region. Fourth, that starts adding up to a first conclusion is that it generates a great uncertainty over the life of retirement, and it increases the preoccupation. And I thank the organization that invites me to address a topic that's different to investment. It is successful, yes, but we need to order this towards those who own the savings, mostly focused on retirement. So my question is, what's missing to be able to close this cycle? We need to focus on financial education, but whose? Of them. And we talk about the savers as something that's ethereal, but who are they? It is the kids. Some of our regions, kids who don't have proper education from the moment they start at school. The youth who are working but still lack knowledge and information to make the right decisions. Also the adults, where they see uncertainty and pressure, and it generates stress. And also the elderly. Sometimes we see this region full with uncertainty that prevails over time. So, what's our duty? Our duty is to help them face challenges they cannot control, and sometimes the world presents to us, but will affect us. And it is concerning because there is not enough financial education. But what are the main aspects that they do not control? First of all, we have a new longevity. Pension systems were calculated for a given age that we surpassed by a long mark. And I want to share this graph with you. This is the evolution of the lifespan. And let's take a look at Uruguay. They were the first, ranked first, with an expectancy of 66 years. 2 years ago, it is the fourth place, and it is growing to 78. And now it is concerning that by the year 2100, Chile will achieve 92 years of age. We will have a long living population that cannot be controlled. Then we have an increasing job informality market. And it is a characteristic of our region that is unfavorable for Latin America. We talk about 140 million people working in the informality. That is over 50% of the active population in the region. For instance, in Mexico, we have also almost 60% of the population working in informality. And this is concerning because all of this population working in informality, and they are not on the formal system, both in pension and in health. Eventually, we will have important pressures for government to maintain them during the elder years. Then we have changes in the pension systems, where we have seen that pretty much across all countries we have some sort of reform to these systems due to different causes. The most concerning to me is the increase of the minimum age of retirement. It is not related to the working life of the workers. It risks all the panorama. Also, we have the financial system, which I admire a lot. No one has control on the volatility of system. We saw this on the pandemic, where unfortunately some persons had to delay their retirement. Not everyone, but this crisis are something that nobody wants to see. Nobody wants to see their retirement reach on a bad moment. And these four elements cannot be controlled by ourselves. But what I call the big challenge, what is in our hands to act, is how to improve the financial well-being of people through education. And that's why it is important to act and associate with the results that we have on the assets. Some figures I'd like to share with you is based on a study that we performed and we do regularly each year. The last report we have is telling us that the population spends 10 hours and a half preoccupied by financial topics, and that leads to reduction in productivity and so on. They are worrying about this during 10 hours of the day. And the main preoccupations, first of all, is retirement. And that is related to debt, to economic dependence, daily expenditures, medical expenditures of retirements, and others. If we associate them all of retirements, we're talking about pretty much 75% of the preoccupations are derived of the poor financial health that we currently have on the region. So, on the summarize, we have four large challenges that we cannot control: longevity, job informality, pension system changes that will probably happen more frequently in our countries, and the volatility in financial systems. But the one we can solve and we can tackle is the financial well-being through education. That is in our hands. We can improve the financial expectancy during the life retirement through proper financial education. That is in our hands, and we can manage it actively. And we can segment financial education. When we talk about financial health, is it the same for men and for women? And the data is that it is not the same. It is more complex for females. And this is due to four factors. First of all, generally speaking, we have an unfair wage scenario between men and women, and it generates a first large problem to tackle. Secondly, we have a decreasing quoting density in the social security systems due to maternity. Becoming a mother in several countries makes them go out of the job market, and that's an important element that determines the amounts of women. Sometimes we hear interesting initiatives. We know about the Argentinian case where they are evaluating, acknowledging lost weeks due to childbearing. To close this gap that is derived from maternity. Third is life expectancy. Women are expected to live 6 years longer than men, and if we start adding things up, this is more complex, and it also derives into the fourth, which is the high health cost expenditure. We have more problems, we have less wages, we have more problems from the maternity side of things, and it has a larger impact for everyone. And this generates an inequality for the possibilities to generate financial well-being across women. And here we talk about a financial issue. Financial education must be according to the situation. What do I mean? Across the life, we have different life peaks, or different important moments. First of all, you are a student, you have your first work through the 30s, then families, then we have the job peak and the retirement. As we cross through these stages, we lose this human capital that is our job life. That's why it is so important to have financial education. We need to compensate this lack of human capital through a proper financial education that allow us to capitalize the results of the asset management, so that in theory we can question this compensation with larger savings. So what can we do to increase the financial health of people? Sometimes we do not need to leave it in a single talk. So I give you 4 particular ideas. First of all, help our collaborators to do this automatically. Young populations, and I see it in the universities, they say, hey, I'm only 25, I have a lot of time, so it's wonderful. We need to take profit from that, but we need to emphasize that things are quick. We can switch from job to retirement in a glimpse. So the second idea is we need to help them, because oftentimes the first question is, how do I begin with a project? We have clear objectives to reach, and they oftentimes are fulfilled. But what happens after retirement? We need to see this from a holistic point of view. But sometimes there is no project. Thirdly, and keep on reading this Mafalda cartoon, they need to be the strategic creators of their lives. And we are not financial strategists. We kind of go happily through life, profiting from the opportunities we have, but we don't have a strategy. where we can maximize the excellent management that we currently have from the savings asset managers. And this lack of strategy impedes us from taking right decisions to maximize them. Fourth of them, the easiest and the most complex, which is acting. Oftentimes, we leave things at good intentions and we don't act. And that starts with deferring, and you know it better than I. The compound interest across time is valuable. That's why Woody Allen says is 90% of success is insisting. So we need to take profit from valuable time as we go by in the different moments we have. And to conclude, first of all, I would ask you to take a look at this picture, and I would come back to it later on. It is a great example of where we're standing and what we can do. The definition of financial education is providing individuals with information and knowledge and help develop the necessary abilities to evaluate their options and to take the best financial decisions. Here, I would like to reflect if we are actually providing enough attention to this question. Because if we don't answer this question, we will have issues with poor financial health in individuals. And we will have a lack of definition that we currently see as generationally problematic. For retirement in Latin America, it is a complex scenario because it takes time. It takes time to create habits that are different and better. So as we have better situation financial education, we need to address the segmentation of population so that we don't have large single programs that address particular situations for each generation with different contexts. So that's why it's important to segmentate across generations to address this question. Why is this important? Because as I mentioned, this is both worlds that we have. The right is green, and we have the assets that are new, that are strengthened, that are renewed, that are constantly moved by the context. And on the other side, we have the somber, dry scenario where there is not enough information and there is not enough resources to prosper. So through financial education, we can evaluate that this big green area is gaining weight and we generate greater financial well-being through education. Why? Because I would like for you to avoid this. This is a cartoon for Spain, and Europe is ahead of us generationally speaking, and it is concerning. If they do not repair this, with financial education, we will generate problems for the generations to come. And we know our systems in general have evolved and provided greater responsibility and less dependence on the traditional schemes for the life expectancy. And they are higher and they generate changes in pension schemes. We need to help the individual so that we generate greater financial well-being. Now, I will stick to the time. Thank you very much. If there is any questions, I can gladly stay for a couple minutes to answer them. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Muchas gracias, maestro Moisés Peñalosa. Queremos realmente agradecer su participación y sus aportes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moises Perez, for your participation. We will close this panel with the participation of Dr. Jorge Meléndez Barrón, who studied in Nuevo León University. He has a master's and a doctor's degree by Chicago University. He is part of Afore 21, and he has worked as director of management and finance, along with other appointments. He has worked in the finance ministry, and he has also worked in the financial unit of the Mexican Institute for Social Security. For between 2001 and 2003, he was the General Secretary for CISS, and he has also worked as a teacher of the University of Nuevo León, and he has been director of a faculty. He also worked in ITAM. Thank you very much, Mr. Melendez Baron. You have the floor. And the questions of all three panel members will be answered at the end with Mr. Alcantara. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will allow for my camera to turn on. I will also share my screen. Good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation to Afore 21 and Banorte for being part of this conference. Mr. David Rasu apologizes for not being here. He asked me to perform this presentation for you. So with no further ado, I will first of all like to talk about some topics that are related to the investment funds of CIFORES, Afores, and especially our case, which is Afore 21 Banorte. As you may know, we began in 1997 with a very restricted investment regime with two CIFORES, two investment funds that were managed by Afores. They could invest pretty much only in government debt. As time went by, we agreed to larger diversification so that by 2008 we had 5 investment funds, CIFORES, clustered according to the workers' needs. And by 2019, we came to a scheme of generational CIFORES that we call target-dated funds. And the advantage they have is that they have an investment strategy for their lifespan, so that workers, as they saved, they don't have to change their CIFORE. And in some cases where we have had trouble in the financial markets, we've seen the disadvantage to leave one CIFORE to another. And we don't have to do that in this case. And now we have a long-term strategy where the portfolio adapts to the age of the worker, from taking more risks to less risk as they come to their retirement age. Lately, the regulating authority, which is CONSAR, has boosted changes so that we have more diversification of the funds, so that we evolve from 1997 to now from investing practically in government debt to the possibility to have an investment regime where we see 9 classes of assets, where we can invest in variable yields nationally. We can go also to international stock, in private debt, that is domestical, in restructures, in fibras, in government debt, international and local, and other assets. This has allowed us to achieve an important diversification level, and therefore it has entailed benefits, which I will discuss later on. So the system contributes to the economy in the following ways. Apart from allowing workers to gain the higher replacement rate, pension funds also play an important role in the economy overall. In this case, for Mexico, we are a savings engine. 4.75 out of every 5 pesos is managed by Afores, which are the pension fund system management. We manage the resources of workers. And we also have currently over 20% of the GDP in Mexico, which is 5.95 billion pesos, out of which 1.8 billion is invested in instruments that affect directly the economic activity. We work with private debt, with stocks, with structures, instruments, and fibras. And particularly speaking, the investment of CFORES in domestic infrastructure goes up to billions of pesos, 1.8 billion pesos. That is pretty much half of the national infrastructure is financed by pension funds of Mexican workers. Also, it is important to note that over 200,000 million pesos, that is almost 90% of the total investments, goes to energy through CKDs and SERPIs. So overall, SAR is part of a virtuous circle of workers' income, and it also helps finance the productive activity of the country, and we promote job generations. Afores in the financial system have become a middleman and part of the Mexican system that provides help to the financial Mexican system. We have over 5 trillion pesos, and we have the resources of the workers, and we invest them on companies or government bonds or company bonds, or in specific projects through structures such as CECADES and development certificates and real estate trusts that are called fibras. And we are a sector where we have achieved an important diversification degree to have better security of the funds. Currently, 14% of the assets are invested overseas. Diversification helps us buffer risks, distribute capital to different classes of assets, and it opens the door to different locations. Regarding markets, we contribute to the financial system stability. We generate yields for workers. In 2023, this surplus or increases in the value of trust rose up to 464 million pesos. And we are investors that highlight responsible business practices. We use our leverage so that companies that receive financing from us have certain practices for equality and best practices for governance within themselves. We exert our voting rights to make equity in the directive boards, both for men and women, for the companies that we promote, so that there is a proper governance. And then it is important to mention that our grain of salt to the savings is that we have allowed to build what specialists call a yield curve that goes with Afores that have increased their holding of government bonds from 1998 to this date. It has increased the maturity, the average maturity of the Mexican debt instrument to 8 years, where previously it was barely a year. Also, we have seen several studies where we have seen that the pension funds generate an additional savings. They do not substitute a voluntary savings, but it generates additional savings through the system, and the gross savings for the country went from 1.1 billion pesos as of 1997 to 6.2 billion pesos by the end of 2023. So that is a system whose investment fund system is highly important, and the net yield that Afores have provided to the workers since 1998 amounts to 4.7%. So that currently, out of the 6.2 billion pesos, half of them comes from yields, not from the money that workers provide.
Besides these contributions, recently, the savings system promoted by CONSAR and regulators have highlighted how important it is to take into account environmental, social aspects for their investment, the ASG matters. They have found that those funds that invest with the ASG approach have a higher percentage of survival than the traditional ones, especially the long-term ones, 10 years term, have a better return for investors. So that's why they have promoted their investments in Mexico. CONSAR implemented some modifications in the regulation. So as of the year 2022, it is mandatory for SARS investment to take into account SAG concepts. So by 2022, Afores invested more than 110 million pesos in SAG bonus in comparison with the previous year, where they invested only 1 million pesos. So it's important to see by the closing of 2023, these sustainable social green funds account for more than 3% of the net assets of investments of CIFORES, more than 180,000 billion pesos. Afores are participating dramatically in the investment of SAG criteria. They participated in the first bonus of the federal government that was due that is going to be due on the year 2030. 50 million pesos were invested in that issuance with the ASG concept. In Afore 21 Banorte, as an example of what we do as Afores, we we measure the environmental impact of our investments. We have the commitment to mitigate consequences of climate change. So therefore, we measure the carbon footprint of our investments. We are in alignment with the agenda of the Paris Agreement. We identify transition and physical risk that are environmental, and we have a climate strategy for the real estate sector as an ongoing practice. And of course, inside the Afores, specifically the Afore 21 Norte, we are very concerned on designing policies and programs to promote gender equality for our workers. We have specific goals to narrow down the wage gap and to have more women participating in our directory, because now we have a 50% parity. And we also, as I was mentioning before, we are advocating to have an involvement in the governance, and we would like to promote responsibility for our vote. We promote the fact that we need to have inclusion in the boards, and we need to include women. We want companies where the salary gap is narrowing down and they consider sustainability and inclusion criteria, financial inclusion criteria. This investment policy results in policies that are including the ESG components. And in our case, similar to other Afores, we invest and we promote credit loans for women to SMEs in vulnerable communities. We are involved in the sector of purified water for human consumption. We are involved in renewable and efficient energy. These are the type of projects that we generate: water generation, supporting women, SMEs, employment creation of jobs. We provide scholarships for students, and we also finance creating new hospitals in remote areas where people with few resources live. So I try to give you a general overview about the evolution of the retirement savings fund and its size, in which type of assets we are investing, what are the yields that we have received. And I walk you through the most recent trends that are including the environmental and social components. We are very committed also with all these matters. This is my closing. And once again, I would like to thank the CISS for having me here. Thank you. Thank you so much to all the speakers. We had a great panel. We started with Paul Mondoa, who talked about protections, inflation, geopolitical aspects that are affecting the retirement pensions, especially the response to the pension, the changes in the portfolio, and the actions that have to be taken. Mr. Eric Docio spoke about the evolution of investments and retirement funds, highlighting a very specific situation about ASG, because in the year 2016 they were elective, but they became mandatory, enhancing the quality of the funds and the quality of life of uh, retirees. Mr. Peñalosa mentioned something important about the retirement funds: education, aging, and informality that are common subject matter when we talk about that. Mr. Rasu talked about investment and diversification. In 1997, they were only debt instruments for countries. Still, some of countries like mine, we still have that situation. Retirement funds, in their majority, are used to create public debt. And how, as of 2018, this has been diversified. And we have some questions. I am going to ask them as they appear. The first of the question is to Mr. Paul Mondova from the AIS. What is the role that other actors of the economy are playing in the trends about investments? No. Do you want me to repeat the question? Mr. Mondova, are you listening to the translation? Can you hear me? I am the interpreter. Can you hear me?
Yes, I got you. Sorry, I did not open my mic. Thanks.
Can you tell me what is the role that other actors of the economy play in the trends about investments? Who do we need to approach to consider funds, retirement funds? This is the first question for you. And another question: which experiences of investments can we consider successful, not only in the region, but globally? Successful investments experiences. We are waiting for your answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Quickly, on the first question, towards the end of my presentation, I stated clearly that social security institutions are neither economic nor financial islands. That is, they are interwoven with the economy. And if you look at the traditional conception of the investment agenda, is to transfer the transfer of capital from capital holders to entrepreneurs. So social security institutions in this context, when they accumulate reserves, they become more or less capital holders, and they need investors. And who are these investors? There are entrepreneurs, those who want to get into business and they don't have the capital. So there should be a balance between those. For a market to exist, there should be buyers and sellers, basically. So the social security institutions are more or less sellers of capital because they make capital available. So if the economy is not sufficiently vibrant to absorb the resources that are generated by social security institutions, then we cannot talk about investment. The question here is, who are those investing? There should be an economic environment that permits people to invest. You have to look at the tax laws in place. You have to look at other risks. For instance, security is an element that will come to play when you want to talk about investments, because if there is a risky environment, people would not engage because there will be extremely high levels of risk. So the government has a role to play, the private sector has a role to play, and social security institutions have the duty to provide the capital. To the second example, you asked about a successful investment examples across the globe. I think there are many. And to do justice to all institutions that have done exceedingly well, I will focus more on the principles without citing a particular country. You see, what's the mandate? When I was presenting, I spoke about the mandate of social security schemes. So a successful investment, in my understanding, would not just be a situation where you have positive returns, like in terms of a 10% return on your investment portfolio. You can see it just at the institution to be a good investment. But the question is, what impact has it got on the environment? What is the social security contribution to this particular investment opportunity? So it will be seen as successful if it fulfills the Social Security mandate. I talked about restriction of investments, for instance. If you end up having a good Social Security fund that invests, for instance, in the diaspora with very positive returns, and there is very high inflation rate domestically because of lack of capital. As an institution, you have recorded high returns, but when these returns are repatriated back home, because of high inflation rates, they are eroded. So you would not say the investment was quite successful. So the idea would be ensuring that Social Security schemes contribute in improving the macroeconomic stability of the country and contributing to the promotion of social security. Things like encouraging labor market dynamics, things like improving adequacy of benefits. And adequacy of benefits, as I said, is not just a replacement rate. The question is, if you have a replacement rate of 30, 40%, what can it buy in the country in which you find yourself? So I would think that a successful investment is an investment that contributes in promoting the Social Security mandate. And depending on the country in which you find yourself, depending on the economic environment in which you find yourself, then you can appraise based on the contribution of investment and the outcomes on Social Security. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Paul Mondoa. Thank you very much, Mr. Mondoa. Pasamos en segundo lugar a los demás panelistas.
We are going to ask the question to the rest of the panelists. Eric Ocio, a question for you. How do you measure the right application of ESG factors, and what are the methodologies that are existing for that? Which are the areas of opportunity for investments? And we have questions for Mr. Moisés Pérez Peñalosa. What is the role that citizens play in the discussions of retirement funds, and which are the areas of opportunities that you can see for citizens? Lastly, a question for Mr. Jorge Meléndez. What is the range of investments in retirements, and what are the future trends in the investments sector? I am going to ask you to answer them in the same order. Thank you for the questions. Firstly, regarding methodologies and how to measure the right application of the ESG factors. Currently, ESG factors and methodologies for its measurement are very wide. We have different methodologies, and we don't have a unique way to include this in our investments portfolio. So with the regulation, we ask them to include these concepts in general terms, but there are some guidelines, and I'm going to give you some examples. For investments in rent, they have to use the scores provided by specialized information suppliers. A lot of data points that are existing already for ESG. For risk, administrators not only have to use the credit scores issued by qualifying agencies. This is an additional credit evaluation that has to consider each one of the three pillars, the environmental, the social one, and the governance ones, to assign a likelihood for credit risk. So these are very specific examples of things that are requested, and at the same time, they result in different methodologies that can be used by other administrators. We, as supervisors, have to make sure that these methodologies are well documented and are based in international practices, but we cannot say which one is better or not. We just have to make sure that they are being used in the whole process. This has to do regarding methodologies. Now, regarding investment opportunities, I think that this could be considered from different perspectives. First, if we consider different administrators, in the case of Mexico, different Afores, they still have strengths and weaknesses, areas where they can improve, strengthening their teams, their systems, their equipment, their policies and processes to be developed domestically, the governance of the investment process within their teams, as well as trainings and certifications that had to be assigned to each team. Those are areas of opportunities in which all the investment team can be enhanced. And we can see a more holistic system regarding the assets that they have access to. And this is part of the regulator responsibility. Increasingly, they have to focus on the capacities that administrators have so they can promote the accomplishment of the rates, more just retirement funds, and that's my answer. Thank you. Two questions. The role for citizens in the investments. There is a great constraint in the influence that they can have. They are capital accurate. As I told you, they have had great results. I think that organizations have to generate enough spaces that will allow the relevance of anticipation, the generation of scenarios. If you don't have this type of forecast, you have to fight for that, because sometimes people think that they are very young, but they need to anticipate. And we have to work with the educational system. Financial education is something that they don't address in schools. And another important thing, it's important to mention that today we have an individual responsibility. It's no longer the employer's responsibility. Individual accounts make people to recognize that as they evolve, as they improve their financial situation, they can improve their future, and they don't depend from another scheme. This is not going to change because it's very expensive. And I think this is not going to change. That was the last answer, correct? I think that we still have an outstanding question to Mr. Melendez. What is the future of investments of retirement funds, and what are the trends that you are foreseeing in this market? Well, my colleagues already mentioned that. The current trends for retirement funds regarding the structure of the funds are these target date funds, in which an individual starts very young to invest in a fund, and the structure of its assets allocation is being modified according to their professional career is moving forward. And of course, looking for more diversification in your investments so they can have diversification. And as I mentioned, investments that include social, environmental, and corporate governance components in all the systems. This is a new trend that faces challenges, of course. One of them was already mentioned, how to standardize criteria to assess investments and to prevent practices like greenwashing, like putting only in the paper all these policies. So the trend is to standardize according to international and national standards, criteria to assess these practices. So these are the trends that we are noticing that are growing in the sectors. And another practice in some of our countries is investment in real estate trust funds. This is something recent in our countries. We are moving toward this type of investment. The fund invests in a trust that has considered income for the development of real estate, and then with the income they pay the yield for the investments in retirement funds. The same is happening with the development certificates. There are projects that after the profitability of the projects, they pay to the investors. And finally, the workers that are going to get their retirement fund from these funds. This type of funds, we are looking for diversification and also targeted dated funds. It's not only investing in public companies, but in specific projects. Projects of infrastructure, for example, and investments with ESG criteria. We have found that these projects have more likelihood of successful to give higher return, and they have to respect the sustainability, and they have to respect governance practices. That's my opinion. Thank you so much for all the answers. And now we are going to give the floor to the chair, Mr. Luis Martinez. Thank you all. Thank you all. We would like to thank the steering committee of the CIS, especially Mr. Pedro for your company, and all the stakeholders that are participating that made possible the organization of this panel. I would like to thank Mr. Ocio Cerón, Mr. Ondoa, Jorge Meléndez Barrón, and Moisés Pérez Peñalosa. And I would like to thank Mr. Pérez Alcántara, chair of this commission, and all the audience for being with us in this event. We would like to invite you to take part in all these activities because we are celebrating the week of Social Security. Thank you all.